You mentioned it a little bit before about policy and tax issues. What are some of the things that you're dealing with right now in trying to work with the governor and the state of Illinois?
Yeah, outside of energy, probably the biggest issue we're dealing with right now is the unemployment insurance issue. All your listeners are familiar, kind of the boondoggle that we've seen over the last year, and not just in Illinois, but this pandemic hit, millions of people were unemployed. The unemployment insurance systems couldn't handle it. It was overwhelmed, massive fraud. I was notified by my HR department. I didn't work at the IMA anymore, which I kind of laughed to make sure my key worked. But one of the things on the state's unemployment insurance issue is that unemployment insurance trust fund is funded entirely by employers, the FUTA taxes that we pay. And so when we started the pandemic, Tony, we had a $2.5 billion surplus. So those were employer dollars parked in a trust fund for kind of a rainy day when you had unemployment that would surge. We are today more than $4 billion in debt. So
wow.
In a turn of about 16 months, it's been a $6.5 billion outflow.
Wow.
What happens is when we hit zero, we have to borrow from the federal government. So we owe the feds $4.2 billion right now in unemployment insurance benefits. Well, the only way you get out of the hole, because they're completely funded by employer taxes, you raise taxes on employers or you have to cut benefits on workers. And that would have to be substantial. And so just for historical context, in 0809, which the Great Recession, our UI trust fund debt only got to about $2.2 billion. So we're at 4.2 right now. So we're more than double, or we're double what we were a decade ago. So the solutions generally are, again, you raise taxes on employers, you cut benefits, which would be substantial. Well, we have a third option right now that we're calling on the governor, and that is to use some of the federal ARPA dollars to pay for this. I was just at this conference with my colleagues around the country and looking at some data yesterday. Nearly 36 states have used federal dollars to balance their trust funds. And that way you avoid the tax hike on business, you avoid the benefit reduction. And that's one of the specific reasons that the federal government said you can use this money. So we've called on the governor, as have a number of legislators, to use some of these federal dollars to help resolve our UI trust fund deficit problem. Because if not, we're going to see higher taxes, workers are going to see benefit cuts, but then more importantly, we have to pay interest on this money. And you know what the interest on $4 billion is? Yep. Once the interest starts accruing here in another month or so, we'll have to pay about $50 to $60 million of interest just this year alone. And that comes out of the state's general revenue fund. Well, I don't know about you, but that 50 or 60 million, I'd rather spend it on education or healthcare or infrastructure or public safety, not paying interest to the federal government. So UI is the other big issue we're dealing with.
So here's a question. How do people find out about this? Because before you said this, and I'm watching Mary Kate, and she was like we're freaking out about these numbers because nobody tells you these numbers, because it's bad news and it doesn't help re-election probably. But how do people find out this information? How do we get these stories out in a way that people can see it for themselves, and not just manufacturing publications, but in a way that you're not going to be called fake news or a crazy person for saying this stuff, but it's real and it's things that people should really care about at the end of the day. So how do people hear about it? How do we share this information?
It's a real struggle because UI is an arcane issue. Most people don't pay attention. They just know, hey, if I'm unemployed, I go get money. Most people have no idea that the employers fund it all, that it's 100% funded. A lot of people think they pay taxes for it. They don't. So, we've done a number of press conferences. We've talked to me. There's one reporter in particular that's done a pretty good job of covering this story. And it's even interesting when the governor in the last couple of days, someone asked him about it. And he said, well, you can't use federal money for that. Well, that's not true. Now, I don't know if he was intentionally being dishonest or he didn't know. He gets asked a lot of questions. And so, things can slip a mind. But again, we've done our best to let the media know. We try to let our members, because as you know, you pay these taxes in only the first $7,000 in wages, and you know what your rates are, and they can go up or down. And they're going to go up substantially to the point that the Department of Employment Security said we can't raise the tax level high enough, to do it. So it's a struggle on that issue because it's the average Joe six pack or Jane six pack. They don't understand it,
Right.
but the employers certainly do. When you see your FUTA tax and it's going to skyrocket, you're going to say, "Holy cow!" Again, we've let all of our members know. We try to educate them. We've done a sign-on letter. The IMA did. We had 300 plus companies, I think, sign on that letter when we sent that to members of the General Assembly. And we're doing a lot of media outreach, and we're starting to get some traction on it. And now that we've seen, again, about 36 states have done this, there's clearly precedent for it. We just have to convince the governor and the legislators, look, there's a lot of good reasons to spend money. This is probably the best because it impacts businesses and workers.